A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Always like to check in with the Australian Christian lobby, and it just feels like there is so much going on in the political space now that affects Christians. And today it's our pleasure to welcome Christopher Brohier all the way from Adelaide, South Australia. Christopher, welcome.
Thanks, Andrew, and good to be here.
As I said, Christopher, so much going on at the moment in Australia politically that affects those of us of faith, not to mention wider society. What are the hot topics you want to discuss today?
So, Andrew, the big issue that's happening at the moment is the Chloe Cole tour. Chloe, for those who don't know, is a young 19-year-old detransitioner from California. She, from the time she was about 13, was, according to her story, pretty well encouraged, pushed by doctors who pushed her parents into taking puberty blockers, testosterone, and then at the tender age of 15 having a double mastectomy.
Yeah. Now, Christopher, this is hot off the press. We've actually just had her in the studio, and we're going to play that interview in about 45 minutes from now, so people can hear firsthand that story, which is an amazing story. But what is Chloe doing in Australia? Tell us about the tour.
Yes, so, I won't spoil her story. She can tell it far better than I can. So she's come here, and we've had a national tour with her and with Dr. Andrew Amos, a psychiatrist from Queensland, and also another Australian detransitioner, Courtney Colson. So they started in Sydney. They had a meeting in Parliament House. Then they went to Canberra, had a public meeting. And then the next day they had a meeting in Parliament House with about, I reckon, 15 MPs. And then they came to Adelaide and they saw about 10, 15 MPs. Plus we had a forum in Parliament House on Thursday. And we had about 80 people there with about 10 MPs. And then she finished in Adelaide, and then she's off to Breezy. So tonight is Brisbane. That's the big thing, which I've got to say I mustn't forget. Tonight in Brisbane, 7 o'clock at the Grand Chancellor Hotel, a public meeting. You got to get tickets. You can still get tickets from the ACL website, www.acl.org.au, and go to events, and you'll find it there. Yeah.
So that is on tonight in Brisbane. Just tell us the response from the politicians that she's met so far. What was the room like after hearing her first-hand account of how this experience really damaged her life?
The response has been to admire her courage, to thank her for what she's done. But so far, from the politicians, and particularly those in power, it's been disappointing, I would say, in this sense that no one has said, look, we've got to do something about this. They've said, look, New South Wales is doing an inquiry. We'll wait for them to see what happens. When you hear what's happened to this girl and other girls, and the point she makes is that this is not a Californian thing. This is happening in Australia. We do the same things to kids. It's the same guidelines that are used. There should be an outrage. But the encouraging thing is that in among the people, there is a real desire to change. So the local paper in South Australia, the Advertiser, conducted a poll asking the question, should this medicalisation of kids with gender dysphoria be stopped? And it was a 95% yes, from something like 1,200 people who aren't. So the public is getting it, but the police are still lagging behind. And so the message that we want to get through to all our listeners, all your listeners, is it's up to us. We have to bring the change, and we have to be constantly at the doors of these MPs saying this is not good enough. Because, Neil, the rest of the world is changing. UK has banned this treatment for kids. Finland, Sweden, France, Norway, etc., 20-something American states. The rest of the world is moving, and we've got our head in the sand. Well, that might be if you're an emu, but it's not good enough for our kids.
I agree, Christopher. Just hearing Chloe's story firsthand earlier today, it reminded me of something I would have expected out of Nazi Germany in World War II, where the German scientists were just given free rein and they literally did all these experiments, these cruel experiments on people in the name of science. Her story to me sounded like that, some Californian experiment that she underwent under the supervision and encouragement of healthcare professionals to see what would happen if you transition a 13-year-old girl into a boy. It was just awful.
The only thing is it's not a California experiment. It's across the Western world. It's Brisbane. We know in the Brisbane Gender Clinic that Dr. Gillian Spencer has been suspended because she spoke out against this. She said, look, these kids, and a lot of these kids have comorbidities. They have a lot of autism, a lot have adverse childhood events. And she said, look, we've got to be treating the underlying, asking questions about this treatment, and they suspended her. And she's still suspended. She's fighting a case in the courts. That's Australia. We know that's happening across Australia. So we have to say this is happening here. It's not good enough. And the really shocking thing that came out of this tour from Dr. Andrew Amos is this is not an experiment. Because in an experiment, you test to see the results. And they don't keep a track of what happens to kids who work through their clinics and leave. Because they don't want to know how many detransitioners there are, because that would affect their ideology. This is an ideological push, and Dr. Amos explained it this way. They say that kids, the proponents of this treatment, say kids have an innate sense of gender identity. They know who they are, and the job of the medicos is to facilitate that. Now, we know from stats that were produced at the South Australian Parliament that in South Australia, kids as young as 3 are at the gender clinic. Now, this is a medical scandal. 3-year-olds do not know what they are. A friend of mine who's a doctor explained to me like this: his granddaughter thinks she's a dragon, wants to be a dragon, and she's a little something 3 or 4-year-old. So, okay, you can be a dragon today, but you don't start operating on the child to bring that change, and this has got to be called out.
Yeah, absolutely, and you articulated it so well then. Well, Chris, for all of our listeners, if they're like thinking, yeah, I want to do something about this, what can people do right now? Direct us towards websites or petitions. What can the average listener across Australia right now do to fight this thing and to push back against this agenda?
Well, 2 things. So first, go to www.acl.org.au, and if you're not signed up, sign up, and we're sending out regular information. We've got an ongoing email campaign to write to your local MP. But the second thing is, find out from the phone book or Google your local MP and ring them up or drop them a snail mail or an email saying, look, I've heard of what's happening in the gender clinics. We have to stop this. We have to have an inquiry. This will change by people power. And there's a lovely verse in Zechariah which says, the people will go to pray, and then it says, I also will go. And so the sense is the prophet is saying, look, it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing, I'm going to do something. And that's what I'd love all of us to do, to say, look, doesn't matter what anybody else is doing, I am going to do something. I'm going to talk to an MP, perhaps the first time, because this is our kids. It's not just something out there. This could be your children and your grandchildren, because the other really bad thing that came out, and we've known it before, is that this is being taught now to kids from kindergarten up. They are taught that no one can know only you can know who you are, and you get to choose whether you're a boy or a girl or something else. So this is scandalous, and we've got to deal with the medical, and then we've got to deal with the educational.
Yeah, you're right. It is. It's actually evil. It's not even scandalous. It's evil. Christopher. But so the first point of call is to go to the ACL website. That's acl.org.au, and ACL can help people. And that's regardless of what state you're in today. This is something we need to push back against. And, Christopher, the sad thing is some of these kids, they don't even have a parent fighting for them, that maybe because of their family situation or trauma they've suffered or a disconnect with their own family. They don't have a mum and dad fighting for them, giving them wise counsel. And that's where us Christians need to step up, don't we? We need to fight for all the kids of Australia, even if they're not directly related to us. And, I just want to thank you guys for fighting so hard on this. From the ACL there, Christopher. But just briefly also, stuff's happening in Queensland as well with the Queensland election. Tell us about that.
So we know the Queensland election's coming up in October, and I think there's a couple of sitting weeks left. There's a bill that has been produced called the Respect at Work and Other Amendments Bill, which sounds good, but as usual with a lot of these bills, what sounds good is not good. So what they're doing, three things in this. First, to make a positive obligation on all workplaces to enforce anti-discrimination laws. So that means Christian schools have got to be teaching practically the whole anti-discrimination ethos. And that affects things like what we've been talking about, that can you be a boy if you're a girl, etc. So that's the first thing. And that's going to run into a fundamental block with the faith of Jesus, which says that we are born, created, and female binary, and we are going to we're designed for each other, and marriage between a man and a woman. Now, we have to teach something different. That's the positive obligation. The second thing that they're doing is to widening the definition of this concept of gender identity. So, and the definition goes something like this. So if you listen, would just stay with me. It goes something like this. You'll have to check it to get it clear, but that a person's romantic or affection for persons of the same sex or another sex or some other sex, and something like the representation of that in conduct and in gestures and things like that. Now, when you start digging into what that actually means, it could mean anything. It really could mean anything. And so the burden on schools and the potential for discrimination claims is going to be massive. The third issue this bill brings in is setting a very low bar for vilification claims. So just as an example, Tasmania has got the lowest bar. It says that speech that causes offence can be against the law. And so Queensland is going in that direction. So all of these three combined is going to be a real burden on all Christian institutions, particularly Christian schools.
Okay, wow. So that also needs to be pushed back against. So for our Queensland listeners, once again, go to the ACL website. That's acl.org.au. And Christopher, I'm sure there's an option on there, is there, for people to also try and push back against this particular legislation?
Yes, so Rob Norman is doing a lot of work in that space, and so there's things that we can do. Yeah.
Well, Christopher, so much going on in Australia right now. It just feels like things are hotting up spiritually, they're hotting up politically. And to our Queensland listeners especially, there is an election later this year, so it's a great time to push back. It's a great time to make MPs nervous. And go to the acl.org.au website, and they can help you with that. And just quickly, Christopher, the last thing is Northern Territory. What's going on there?
So election in Northern Territory in August, and this is some good news. The Country Liberal Party, who are the opposition, have said two things. One, last year the Labor Party took away the right of Christian schools to hire and fire according to faith. The Country Liberal Party have committed to restoring that right. Big tick. The second thing is that they have said that they will legislate for care to be provided for babies born alive out of failed abortions. We know that happens. We know that happens in Queensland, across the country. South Australia and New South Wales provides for that in legislation. Queensland provides for that as a policy document, and the NT have committed, the CLP have committed to providing for that in legislation. Big tick for them there.
Excellent. Well, that is a positive to end on. But Christopher Brohier from the Australian Christian Lobby, all the way from Adelaide, South Australia today. I want to thank you so much for joining us on 2020 Today.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, listeners.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.